Welcome to episode number 10 of GreenChat. Here we continue on the challenges and opportunities of the ramp up of EV space with the same elite panelists that we had. Let us jump straight ahead into the next topic in hand, which is a huge topic in itself, the supply chain aspects, right? So we're dependent on these materials, lithium and cobalt, battery wise, right? And if you're using BLDC motors, you're using this neodymium and other, rare earth materials which are not available in India, right? So that's a huge challenge from a security for India standpoint, right? So what should we do about it? What can India as a country do about it, right? Does it make sense to even push lithium and wait for other batteries that are more indigenous to mature? So that it's a lot more Atmanirbhar solution from an India perspective. Your thoughts?
So I think my view on lithium, as you rightly said, this is again going to become the source of power. When I say power, I'm not talking about electric power. This is going to become a source of like a power center. And this is going to create a lot of geopolitical situation. Okay. I think that's why I believe EV should not be looked at as a single-minded approach. I'll convert everything from IC engine to EV, right? That's how I immediately gravitate to what Subra said, right? It should be a balanced approach between what we want to do as EV, which I believe is the right solution for city commute. Long commutes, long hauls, probably there are other choices also we should actively look at, right? But again, everybody is cognizant about the challenge this is going to pose. There's a lot of research going on. I'm very sure there are going to be options coming up for lithium also, right? You must be aware that graphene has been in the conversation for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. There are also some startups focusing on graphene. So I believe eventually with some more time, more technology will come as an option to lithium. So lithium-based cells is still a big challenge today in terms of availability, right? Because everybody is globally, everybody is pushing for the electrical conversion. And today the global manufacturing capacity is lesser than the demand. So the demand is already going much ahead, right? I'm not just talking about India, I'm talking about global demand for lithium-based cell is galloping much ahead than what is available as a manufacturing capacity. All the biggies are working on increasing their manufacturing capacity, but the demand is, that's why I said, no, there's a waiting list for many of the EVs now, right? Yeah. So there is definitely a supply issue in the near term, but a long term, I think there has to be development of alternate technologies on high power density battery packs, right? Which uses cells which are not necessarily lithium based.
Correct, but then you need to also build the infrastructure now for some kind of backward compatibility. If you want to replace your battery with something more domestically available later.
Yeah, I think eventually, I think most of the companies will look at a kind of a modularity to replace the old generation with the new generation. I think those are solvable problem, I believe. I mean, if you know that it's going to go that way, this is solvable, workable. But eventually we have to wait for more technologies to evolve, which is going to kind of offset our dependency on lithium, right? Mm-hmm. But I think there are solutions already emerging for the high energy magnets that you spoke about, Mux. Mm-hmm. I think that's another area of concern. But if you see, some people have done very well on how to manage it. And a lot of companies, I am a motorman personally. I've spent a lot of my life on motors. I think motor as a technology has been by far not paid enough attention, I believe. Even though this is one of our oldest machine, probably older than even an IC engine. I mean, just think about it. As an engineer, developing an IC engine is far more complex than motor actually, right? Mm-hmm. But motors also, I think, there's a lot more research going on to motor with the development of metal science. magnetic composites and things like that, we are looking at ways to pack more power density, right? At the end of the day, how do you want to pack more power in a particular packaging size is what forces you to go to high energy magnets, right? Rare earth magnets. So I think there is a lot of consciousness in that. And a lot of companies are working on to wiggle out of, if I can use the word, of using rare earth magnets, or at least lower the dependency on rare earth magnets, right?
Yeah.
But those are long-term things. But on the immediate near term, there is definitely a supply situation. Supply chain is such a challenge. I mean, when we talk about EV, we only look at lithium ion, but the near-term challenges are far more deeper, right? Because even the sub-elements of the vehicle are designed differently for EV, right?
Yeah.
Just think about throttle. The throttle in an EV is not the same throttle mechanism you have on the vehicle, right? Or even the lamps, or even the switches, right? Typically, we don't want to have this copper contacts in switches, right? We want electronic switches, things like that. So there is the near-term challenges are very, very deep, very, very wide, solvable. But just to say the supply chain today is a limiter in terms of where the demand is going. The demand is going much ahead of the, so there is a short-term problem which we have to focus on, which have to be solved by the tier 2, tier 1 companies. But there's a long-term strategic problem on more technology-based challenges, right? Based on lithium ion and rare earth magnets. So, but I think there is actions going on there.
Excellent, excellent, Ramesh. I think it shows your deep knowledge in the supply chain space as well. Shankar, you want to add something?
Yeah, I'd love to add here. Sure. See, just like lithium, we had a concern about cobalt. Cobalt coming from just one country, Congo, whereas lithium, at least there were 3 South American countries to do that. Yes. But what you would see in the last 3-4 years is the amount of cobalt has come down very significantly. We hardly use 1/6 of cobalt what we used to use before. So I'm confident that in the long term, whether it's lithium for the batteries or the rare earths for the motors, we'll surely come up with alternatives, and that shouldn't be a problem. But in the short term and medium term, definitely lithium will continue to rule the game. And that's where what is very important for us to do is design our battery pack in such a way it's very easy to recycle and reuse the material. For example, Tesla works with redwood materials, which claims that it can retrieve almost 90% of the battery material. So the technology is there to do that. And we should definitely focus on collecting, recycling, and reusing the battery materials if we want to mitigate some of the supply chain risk around the battery materials in India. I think that's very important.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think the point about Congo, I just want to add one point to it. Its cobalt is available in other locations also. The reason why the Congo ones are more famous is that you get the cheapest from there, and it's because of child labor. It's really pathetic, right? And we are, as EVs, we are claiming to be green and doing all this, and we are propagating child labor, which is really, really sad to see, right? And as you rightly pointed out, right, the real question is, are Indian companies ready to invest in the supply chain, right? Are Indian companies ready to look at material research and look at alternative materials? How many such companies exist now at that level of fundamental research? Are India's missed the bus, so to speak, the EV bus as well as the ICE bus?
So again, I have a point here. To see, industry alone can't do this. We definitely need a very strong collaboration between industry, academia, startups, and the government labs. All 4 have to come together, pick up different pieces of the puzzle. Some will work on long-term technology development, and some will work on taking the lab discoveries into products in the short and medium term. That collaboration needs to be in place. I think that's the only way we'll be able to crack this.
Totally agree. I mean, I think it's heartening to see such centers of excellences coming up in universities like IIT Madras, IISc, IIT Bombay. We are seeing clusters of such centers of excellence is emerging, and that's the early stage of industry academia coordination that I was talking about. But we need to see more and more of that. Absolutely agree. And supply chain, is a big challenge, right? As it stands. If there are no more points on that, I'd like to go to the next question. Okay. The world famous charging infrastructure, the anxiety that exists, is it real? Or could some kind of a vehicle level intervention and more smart electronics really guide us into the right charging required for each type of vehicle, depending on the distance and the planning that's involved? What type of charging can be used? Fast charging, overnight charging, and of course the battery, the perennial charging versus battery swapping question does exist. What's happening? What's the know-how as we stand currently? What are what's been worked on? What are the models that have been worked out? Where are the gaps? What are the opportunities in the charging?
Mux, the reality is this is an area where it starts getting a little emotional, right? So here we have schools which strongly believe in fast charging. There are schools which strongly believe in battery swapping, right? And I belong to the school of fast charging, right? Not only me, my company is also very high on fast charging, right? Subra was talking about the amount of capital required when we talk about customers who have to procure a vehicle, right? But the overall amount of capital required to put battery swapping also requires enormous amount of capital, right? It's not just there are challenges even to make it affordable when we put large battery packs in vehicle, right? But if somebody also has to invest so much capital on swap stations, all the stuff, I think it becomes a mind-boggling issue in terms of capital allocation. And then you have to look at ROI and things like that. It's not that people don't have cash. I think we can get cash if there is a right business model, but the ROI may not be there, right? That's what I believe in, or our school believe in. Second is, again, battery swapping requires, again, going back to a large amount of standardization. It can't go to a point that each organization has their own standard and they come with battery swapping on their own, right? And it's also very difficult for the government to come and say, this is the standard, everybody has to make the same kind of battery pack also, right? So it's not just the basic, the geometry of the battery, right? How do you manage the battery management system? How does the battery management system talk to your vehicle system? A lot of things. I think probably you can call me that I'm fixated about this, but I don't believe battery swapping long-term is a viable solution. So I belong to the school of fast charging / overnight charging. Okay. That's where also I believe that I said in some time back, right? I look at it as city commute versus long-term commute, right? Long hauls and intercity commutes, right? So that's I belong to that school. I think long-term it's going to be fast charging and overnight charging, right? But there are also data to say that coming from our own company, in scooters, we are the biggest provider of fast charging in the country, right? We don't enter a city without putting fast chargers in place. And we also want to have a belief that at any given point of time, your scooter should be having access to a charging station within the next 5 kilometer radius, right? That's what we are moving towards. But the reality is the number of people who use fast chargers is like 5 to 6%. We provide this, but 95% of the customers do overnight charging, right?
This is very, very important data point, right? This is very, very critical. I think it's all about the anxiety versus the actuality of how it's being used, right?
Yeah. I think, yes, you rightly said that, right? That's the word now. Range is an anxiety now, right? Especially if you're a city commute guy, it's more an anxiety. And the vehicle tells you how much charge you have, and we have trip planners, things like that. It's more an anxiety, right? And once you create this magical number of hitting a 3-digit, beyond that, I don't know whether you have to really chase range anxiety, right? I don't know. Of course, I may not connect with Ganapathi when I say this, because big basket may have different needs for the delivery business, right?
Because they're operating it daily, continuously throughout the day, right? So they need. I think the range anxiety there is far more acute compared to a daily commuter in a two-wheeler, right? So,
yes.
So maybe Subbu, you want to take you want to give your perspective on that. Yeah.
Yeah. So echoing what Ramesh said, it all boils down to the use case and how you're going to use it and do it. What I personally feel is I don't belong to any particular school, whether it's fast charging or overnight or battery swapping. What I have seen actually happening on the ground is that wherever there are vehicles which are typically two-wheelers and the auto rickshaws, I'm not talking about three-wheeler vehicles which are transporting goods, load this thing. Load, you cannot just do with battery swapping. We have tried, failed miserably. Just not possible with the amount of load and the kind of range, not even getting 40 kilometers. Which person will go to a swapping station and swap twice? You're taking about 80-kilometer kind of a run in a day. It is like visiting a petrol pump twice a day. I mean, nobody will want to do that. Nobody will want to do that. I mean, this is what I'm seeing on the ground up. People want to be happy and they want to see that they can plug in and get charged or simply swap the battery in the case of a two-wheeler, right? So this is exactly what's happening. And typically our ranges are 70 to 100 kilometers. That's the thing. And most vehicles which are in the two-wheeler space are able to provide that kind of a range. And
so sorry to interrupt. Yeah. Could the load vehicle problem be because of improper battery sizing? Maybe it's not sized for the distance.
No. It's if you talk about a typical vehicle which is available in the market, which is 8 to 10 kilowatts is the general battery size which is there in the three-wheeler space today. Typical size of the battery. But if you replace it with 3 or 4 batteries, what really is happening is it may work with the auto rickshaw guy because the load is far, far lesser. A typical auto rickshaw, because of its construct, because it's extremely light in terms of 120 kgs or so, and you got a topper on top, the weight doesn't go beyond 400 kgs. Here you're looking at the weight of the vehicle itself going to 500 plus another 500 kgs of load. So it's not only a question of, and I've seen the typical vehicles in the country using the typical jugaad of not using a full metal body. They're going canvas. I've seen this happening. Is you can see it physically on the ground where people have not put a metal body. They have put a canvas just to get the range available. It's happening. I mean, it's in winter, it's happening. You can see it happening right on the ground in the city. I was very surprised. And I saw that who is this guy who's made this fabricated body? I mean, take hats off to that guy. So that's happening. And from what I've seen in the past 2 years, I mean, the number of charging companies which have come out, whether it is the fast charging or in-house capability or a third-party provider of service or OEM provided plug points are accelerating. And that's a good sign as long as we can get energy being pumped into them and being available, because that's the key here. We can't have a scenario where they're down. So we have gone for having in-house chargers. Almost 1,000 chargers are there across the country, and that's powering our. And we typically use 2 or 3 wheelers and slow charge. That's what it works, and it's working perfectly well.
Makes sense. And that way you can power it with rooftop as well.
Yeah, right? I mean, in the morning hours. Yeah, about whatever is available. And of course, other challenge which is there is, I mean, we are still at the early age of the EV cycle, and we can't even determine the standards. I mean, every company has got its own standards because they believe that, I mean, you can't stifle innovation at this stage, right? Correct. What takes on and what moves ahead is what is going to win in the long race is something which everybody has to choose depending upon the supply chain. Correct. So what we have looked at is the traditional 5 amp and 15 amp plug point. which does wonders for the two-wheeler and the three-wheeler space.
Correct.
And it's the all-encompassing standard in India. I strongly feel that fits in this use case of 2 and 3. Of course, fast charging is a different ball game altogether with what Subra brought out earlier in terms of buses and other segment. So I wouldn't want to venture there because of availability of power. That's a challenge which we have.
Good.
And battery swap, I did mention what a challenge is.
Correct. I think I think the ICE engine had the flexibility of being able to go to a petrol pump and charge whenever you want your gasoline, right? Is that need more because because that infrastructure existed, we got used to it, right? But the need may not be there for a daily commuter. For example, a charging station at home and office would more than suffice.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right? But for a vehicle, load vehicle that's running, there's more anxiety, right?
Absolutely.
And for I think charging infrastructure should also I know you did brush up a little bit on V2G. Discharging infrastructure is also necessary, right? We are looking at large buses, like for example, school buses, right? They can discharge. They're done at 4 p.m. And then they can start discharging back to the grid when the green energy is coming down, the solar energy is coming down, and there's a huge need for peaker power plants. A lot of other countries are incentivizing such scenarios for B2G, right? And for example, Shankar's four-wheelers, right? They're sitting there in the office. They could, get charged in the office, and in the 4 to 6 p.m. when the guy is still in office, they can discharge. The V2G aspects of those kind of vehicles need to be looked at. So the continuous, the mindset of having to go to the petrol pump whenever we need it, right, is there in the mindset, and depending on the use case, it may or may not be needed, and that's the point that we are making here in this charging infrastructure, right? So coming to the next question, which is on the funding requirement, right? As and when we talk about funding, EVs, is going to be a higher cost as it stands currently compared to ICE engines. Upfront cost is higher. Cost of ownership is a different story. But then funding has to be done for that. What is the amount of funding that is going to be required to do that target for India? And does that funding even exist in the country? Or are we looking to import some dollars for it? Any thoughts on that?
I think across all businesses, big or small, right? The amount of P's and V's in India are quite large. And it's getting bigger day by day, right? Mm-hmm. Whenever there's no growth opportunity, and India being a high growth market, you see dollars getting into even on something like packaging industry, okay? Like a PE firm, big PE companies coming and investing on packaging is probably unheard of 10 years back. Mm-hmm. But I see companies like Warburg coming and taking over cardboard manufacturing company. With due respect, it's a respectable industry, but the fact is it's still a very much a commoditized product, right? I think that is just to say that there is a lot of funds available in the Western world and it is coming to India, right? If you have the right solution, it's going to come. Of course, but the bigger challenge is even though fund is one aspect, the other is ability of the companies which have the technology. Let's talk about cell manufacturing, right? I know of a situation where when Reliance wanted to talk to a very reputed cell manufacturing company in the world, even Mr. Mukesh Ambani was not able to get connected in a phone call with the CEO of one of the biggest cell manufacturers in the world, right? It's not that Reliance does not have money. It's about these guys are too busy catering to the expansion happening in the world. So my bigger concern is about how are we going to fast track the technology pipeline? Mm-hmm. How are we going to make business deals? How are we going to make these guys sit up and form a pipeline of technology into India, right? But I think fund may not be the biggest of the challenges. That's my personal view. There may be other views.
Yeah, I think given the amount of funds that exist in India, and the larger companies, Adanis and Ambanis of the world in India, are I agree. I think they have enough funds to scale up, and if needed, we can even look abroad. Okay.
Just
I think that was
go ahead,
Subbu. Yeah.
Ramesh's point. I mean, the past 2 years, we have seen a lot of, not 2 years, I mean, much before that also, before COVID also, we've had many companies coming up with purely an electric play. Transportation companies which are getting VC funded, and they are ramping up very well. And we see that in our traditional OEM space too, whether it's any of the companies who are here who are doing that through their own thing. But also like to mention that from the government's perspective, the government is also looking at giving loans. Like for example, in Big Basket, we have an arrangement with SIDBI, wherein there's a scheme called Prayas, so that the government incentivizes giving loans to entrepreneurs for buying the electric vehicles outright at the lowest interest rate. That is also happening parallelly. I mean, when you're looking at the 2 and 3 wheeler segment, up to 10 lakhs can be taken on loan by any individual. We're looking at people on the ground who are in the transportation segment, who don't have the KYCs, the other things which are there in place, because they are the people who are on the ground, who are actually putting the money into the vehicle and running the vehicle, right?
Correct.
So the government has done some amount of activity there too. And of course, companies have got their own schemes where they launched soft loans, and with their finance arms, they're doing that. I don't think that should be an issue. The one question which is there here is how do you depreciate the battery? This is one big question which everybody comes up in the transportation segment. And luckily, I think in the past 1 year or so, we have seen battery as a service blooming. And that is something which should make a difference.
Absolutely. I think Shankar also pointed out the issues with that, through recycling, right? Your value is going to go up if you bring in recycling. And recycling is a self-fulfilling prophecy. You need to have enough batteries to start that business. So you need to deploy more, so that you can have that recycling business also ramp up. So very good, very good. So I think we come to the last question, right? In the EV space, what are some of the moving the pendulum from passenger vehicles to ubiquitous model in electric fleet? What are some of the business model innovations that are required? I know Big Basket is already doing something about leasing versus buying the EVs. If a fleet operator like Big Basket, maybe we should look for your comments on some of the business model innovations that have already happened and what is being looked at or evaluated. That would be very interesting. And I will ask a subset of the question after you guys answer that.
Right. So ours is an asset-light model where we don't own any vehicles upfront, right? So the vehicles are owned by individuals, or the vehicles are owned by transport companies, and they do the deliveries on behalf of us based on the agreed rates with them. So usually what happens here is a mix of models which are available. We have a model wherein a third-party company owns and operates the vehicle, wherein the driver and the vehicle is also provided. Some of the OEMs have even gone to the model where they provide the vehicle with their drivers, right? So they have a transportation wing. They have the manufacturing arm which manufactures the vehicle, and they sell it to their transportation wing, and the transportation wing comes in and plays the role of a logistics partner, wherein they deploy the vehicle with the driver. A third model is purely a lease model, wherein a company can lease out a vehicle to Big Basket. on commercial terms, and we have to find a driver to drive that particular vehicle. This is the third model. And the fourth model is an individual owning the vehicle himself. I mean, that is either through a loan, which I had mentioned earlier, or it could be an outright purchase with him buying it outright, or any other company is providing him the finances for that particular vehicle. We've got all these models available out there. And I did also mention about the battery as a service, wherein there are some companies which sell out the complete vehicle with the battery, and then they buy back the battery and then lease it out to the company. So that model also is available for takers out there. But per se, we are not there in outright purchase because we strongly believe that in the grocery business, in the space of using two-wheelers is something which is not really exciting because we feel that there is a vehicle called trike, which is an innovation which is needed on the ground today. And we strongly believe that is the market which has to come in, because that gives stability to the driver and will be able to take loads which are much better than a two-wheeler from safety aspect. And of course, it will not be able to take the vehicle load as compared to a three-wheeler, but it will be far better than a two-wheeler is what we believe in. And I think that that's a space we would be excited upon. And we would look at that as a method to take on. Maintenance and service infrastructure and training is a constant input we want to look at, because there are very few people who are able to, who are actually trained on the ground to be able to get the vehicle up and running when it is down. So usually what happens is the typical companies, when they come with 5 or 6 vehicles, they have one vehicle as standby. And they go about delivering, because we can't have a situation where the services are disrupted to the customer. So you just swap the vehicle and then you take it back to the workshop and get it fixed, and it comes back into play. So that's the broad sense of what we are doing.
Excellent, excellent. Shankar, any other thoughts from your side?
See, this is connected to the range anxiety. What kind of a business model can very effectively address that? Because my typical city commute could be typically 50 kilometers a day. But once in a while, I may want to drive from Chennai to Bangalore, which is 350. For that sake, I end up going for a bigger battery. And with the kind of concerns around availability of lithium, this is not a responsible use of lithium also, to lock it up in a battery just for use, which I do it once or twice a month. So one of the things to look at is basically a subscription model, where the OEM can give them option of choosing a vehicle with a smaller battery, smaller range during the week, and a bigger battery with a bigger range for the long weekend drive. That kind of a business model also can effectively address the range anxiety.
Excellent.
Sure.
I think we spoke about few things, right? One is the life of the battery, right? What can be, there is still an anxiety among people saying that what can be the logical life of the battery? I mean, with phones also now getting, people are used to a term like, when you look at the normal user, their phone life is getting shorter and shorter, primarily because your battery starts to die down, right? So there is one aspect about consumers being anxious about the life of the battery. On the other hand, there is also the other side of the story is the upfront cost becomes bigger because the battery is expensive as compared to. So actually, subscription-based model for battery is a very, very logical choice. Okay, you may own the vehicle, but the battery is subscribed, which is actually like takes the stress out of owning a EV, right? Yeah. So lease the battery pack as a leased business model is a very, very logical choice. Of course, I don't know whether people understand it, because people are now also starting to equate a subscription to a EMI, right? which means they said, okay, do I ultimately own the vehicle? Do I ultimately own the battery, right? So I think even though subscription appears theoretically as a very logical choice, subscription-based model for battery alone appears as a very, very logical choice. There have been some challenges around making it.
I think the answer is also in the age group. I think Gen Z and beyond will love the subscription model, and the older ones who want to own the vehicle will
yeah, probably. I think once the proliferation, once the proliferation starts, and also when we have multiple technologies of battery, right? Like now we are lithium based, but now after 4 years you migrate to I'm just saying something graphene based, right? So if the battery is only the subscription model, you can just swap it and take the next generation technology of battery, right? But also eventually we have to look at recyclability and affordable recyclable battery. Today, even though we have recycling of battery, as a business model, is still not very successful economically. So we still have to make.
You need the volumes. You need the volumes on that first.
You need the volumes,
and then the right type of recycling, where, as Shankar pointed out, 90+% can be recycled. Then it can be very viable.
It becomes a viable business model. So I think subscription is a very promising business model, if not as a complete EV, but as a battery pack.
I had actually a query or a question to both Shankar and Ramesh in terms of the subscription model. I mean, it's more to do with policy. I mean, if you look at the typical mindset of a vehicle with 125cc or 150cc, you have a challenge here in the subscription model, because when you go to the policymakers to get a vehicle homologated, you say that this is with battery X, with battery motor so. And I mean, how will this dynamic come is a question. I think it's a very, very relevant question, which is, from the example of what Shankar was bringing out about daily commute versus the large commute, providing the space and being able to work on. I mean, that's something which will have to be addressed, is what I strongly feel about.
I agree with you, right? But usually the consensus is that you don't need to actually swap a battery for the first 3 to 4 years, right? Or even 5 years, right? So I understand that is another aspect of a challenge on how to make subscription-based model a reality. And the point you raised, Ganapathi, is real. But technically, we believe it's not a challenge, because you don't have to change the battery in 5 years. That's the confidence that each OEM has to create about their own design of the battery pack, right? But again, it's a small digress. The reason you said also makes me say that swappable battery is not a reality, right? At least in India, it's not a reality.
I think yeah, there are two schools of thoughts, like you said, right? So as standards evolve, maybe swappable will become easier. You never know.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah. So we're not there yet. Yeah. We're not there yet, but we should be open to the possibility that we will actually have the standards to make the battery swappable, and every battery is equivalent to any other battery. And that's a good aim to have, but but it requires a different business model as well. Yeah.
Exactly.
Excellent. Subra, any last thoughts? You've been quiet last couple of questions.
Yeah, I think the last couple were more relevant to some of the other panel members.
Sure.
But I just wanted to perhaps summarize, right, and put out some radical thoughts, so that we will have some food for thought, right, after the session as well. So one thing that came out is the broad idea of supply versus demand. Right. So as we demand more and more electricity, and we know that power generation can't keep pace, we know that the grid is inefficient, prices are going to go up. Right. That's how supply will meet demand, by raising prices. Right. In this kind of a situation, which is a very bad situation for moving to all electric, because the move to all electric is based on the premise that electricity prices will at least be constant or will not go up much, right? And we are already seeing, as I said, 3x kind of price increases just announced overnight, just like that. And that's a big deal. And supply versus demand will affect battery prices, it will affect rare earth prices, all of that, right? So if the whole world is going to start making EVs in some form, whether it's 2-wheelers or 8-wheelers or how many other wheels you want, again, production, mining, manufacturing of cells is not going to keep up pace with the demand, right? So these are ominous messages. So battery prices have now started actually going up slightly. And in the automobile sector, we saw the same issue with electronics. There's a huge supply demand issue, which everybody was caught unawares. Then electronics prices have shot up. Electronics supply simply isn't available for quite a few chipsets. Yeah. Right? And nobody saw this coming. People just assume that electronics will keep following Moore's law and it will keep dropping. Right? But there are other factors at play in the supply versus demand. Right? Same thing with motor rare earth prices. So one thought that I wanted to throw out there is, if we keep following the global trend, right? If we make batteries out of lithium, if we make motors out of permanent rare earth magnets, we are going to fall into the trap that we know is coming. Right? I mean, and we have to only blame ourselves for falling into the trap a few years from now. Right? So there has to be radical thinking. Right? India, for example, was very mature in lead acid chemistry, but we hardly bothered to work on even nickel cadmium, even on lithium. Right? There was very little nickel cadmium effort in India. Lithium, I would say almost zero until the PLI scheme was announced recently. And now a few people have said, because of that scheme, I'm going to start making cells, which is super late in the game. Right? Yes, it will improve the supply demand situation, but it is not going to offer any kind of technological breakthrough. Likewise, India was very good in motors. Right? We were very good at winding copper, making induction motors. Right? And now we are saying we'll go the rare earth route, and I don't think that makes sense at all. We should find a way not to go the rare earth route at all. And of course, there are technologies to do that. And if you want to go even more fundamental, electromagnetics is not the only way to convert electricity to rotating motion. Right? There are other fundamental technologies that require neither copper nor magnets.
Yeah, I can see Ramesh smiling.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with him.
Right. So why are we harping? Why are we assuming that you have to wind copper, you have to put a bunch of magnets? Right. I mean, there are many other options, and somehow we are just not doing that. We are thinking, I mean, in pockets. I mean, at least given that I'm leading innovative activity at Ashok Leyland, I'm trying to push my team to do. But there doesn't seem to be a national realization that we are going down a path where we know the end. Right?
No, I think it's happening. Like you said, I think going back to your grid problem, right?
Yeah.
Let's address that first. I think that's a very myopic view of raising prices. And I don't think it's generally true. I think Tamil Nadu or some particular states may have some issues like that, but nationally mandated, rates for EVs are much lower. Not your 20
It is a myopic view, but it is
a very myopic view
happening, unfortunately, because
but I think
it's price just, is where we are paying in large part for the inefficiency of the electricity board, inefficiency of the grid itself.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And I think there are solutions for that. That's already been on the table. It's in the cabinet right now, the privatization part, etc. So there's a lot of things thinking, which is deeper compared to just the EV side of things, right? So I think you brought up a valid point. That instability will go away with time, right? But meanwhile, you still have to ramp up your EVs, and you have these supply chain challenges that you pointed out.
I completely agree. Yeah. See, in the chicken and egg of whether the grid will supply first or whether the EVs will be launched first, I think one of them has to come first, and that one is the electric vehicle. The grid has to follow. Correct. Once they see the demand is when the grid will start truly improving.
Exactly. Yeah.
It can't be the other way around. At least that's how it works in India.
Yeah.
Right. Correct. And I also want to say that I don't like batteries at all. Right? It may be a scandalous thing to say, but see, batteries have been around, have had their shot.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Maybe there is a couple of chemistries. There's aluminum, there's zinc, there's sodium. But batteries to me are very messy things. Right. You can't get away from that. They're messy things, they're heavy things, they're bulky things. Right. And I think there is a need to think differently on how the general problem is, how do you store electrical energy efficiently? It doesn't have to be an electrochemical reaction, especially because now we are moving to higher and higher voltages, right? A lot of people are moving to 850 volt today in the slightly bigger vehicles, perhaps not in the two-wheelers. But and that's when batteries make less and less and less sense, because a fundamental electrochemical reaction has a low voltage, and you can't go beyond that 3 to 4 volt.
More series connections you have, more non-uniformities, the usual challenges.
Yeah. So it is making less and less sense. Batteries as a whole, right, is just making less and less sense. And this is a huge statement to make, because then we have to really ask ourselves, what is the right way to store electrical energy, if not an electrochemical reaction, right? And batteries also have thermal management issues, which eventually affect the efficiency of an electric vehicle, because you're converting electrical chemical back to electric. And that conversion cycle is not the most efficient conversion cycle. Maybe more efficient than an IC engine today, but it's still not super efficient. Right? So an IC engine, at least fortunately, is driving the wheel mechanically directly.
Yeah.
There is the conversion. The problem with an IC engine is it's burning the fuel and it's converting things to heat first, which is the worst way to do things. Right? So all I'm trying to say is we have to think very, very different, right? Because the chain of lithium batteries, the chain of rare earth motors is just not the way to go. And it's plainly obvious today as to where that's going to end, right? And unless we start today and say, technically, here is a new way of storing energy, here is a new way of converting energy into motion, right? I don't think, then we'll be permanent followers, right? And we'll be at the mercy of supply chain, we'll be at the mercy of prices, right? So that's all I had to say in summary.
No, very excellent point, Subra. Yeah. No, I think, Shankar, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, one last point. While it is very sexy and tempting to pursue this kind of bold research and really breakthrough ideas, we have to strike a balance there in terms of how much we want to pursue standardization so that we can bring down the cost today by just scaling up, versus how much of innovation we should pursue so that we are ready for tomorrow with something that is truly innovative and differentiating. So I think all of us need to kind of arrive at our own ratios in terms of how much effort we should put on standardizing a technology so that we can make it affordable, versus how much of those new ideas we should be pursuing to secure our IP for the future. Absolutely. I think this is something very strategic we should all keep in mind.
Love the put food on the table today aspect. Even
though I am from a hardcore EV, I am into battery and motors, I have a lot of connects with what Subra said here, right? I don't think it's lithium and rare earth motor is the end all. Okay. Today, the problem is we are looking at it as a cure-all, right? But I don't believe it's a panacea. But of course, it is a viable springboard for a certain set of vehicles, right? But there should be a balanced approach in other alternates. I think in motor, I think there is a lot of activity happening in terms of trying to move away from rare earth magnets. I think there is a good amount of effort that I see happening in India, globally, to move away from rare earth magnets. But I think energy storage is still a concern, right? I think enough. But again, the approach is, it's going to be very difficult for a company which is in the market, which has to answer to the your Dalal Street to spend so much money. But the other flip side is they also have to create a good business model where they separate their core business from what they are going to do on doing fundamental research, right? There, I think the existing homegrown companies have to create a different model where they have the base business, which is getting insulated from a kind of another startup, if I can use the word, which insulates them from getting burned on one side, right? So that their P/E ratio or their market prices are not getting impacted, right? How do they going to do that is something I think the business leaders have to explore. But of course, there is a lot of startups trying to the incubation cell of IITMs and other IITs. There's a lot of other people who are coming with different thoughts on what else is available out there other than lithium. What else is available outside? How can we use even ferrite magnets to create higher power densities? I think that's happening, but I think more impetus is required there. The pace is, the thought process is there, but the pace is not right. We need a lot more. We need a lot more thought on that, right? Methanol or hydrogen. Those areas are by and large, even though FAME encompasses all that, FAME is now getting equated to EV.
Yeah.
So I think even if you look at the whole, our podcast today, there's a skew towards EV, not like alternates, right? So
no, I think we have a different, in this particular podcast, we wanted to focus only on EVs, and that's why we're talking about it. But we do have segments in GreenChat which will talk about the other pieces. In fact, earlier, episode 8, we talked about some of the other pieces as well.
In spite of the fact I'm a motor person myself and I manage battery engineering, I do resonate with what Subra said.
Excellent. So we've come to a sort of a logical end for this particular podcast. I know it took much longer than we thought originally, but I think we covered a lot of the aspects of the problems and opportunities that exist in the EV space as India ramps up EV in the 2-wheeler, 3-wheeler, 4-wheeler, heavy-duty vehicle space. So if you were to summarize this, I'm going to put you all on the spot in one word, right? The challenges and opportunities that exist. Let's start with Shankar. Put that in one word for you.
So it's all about getting the product differentiation strategy right. And in turn, it leads to doing what is important for tomorrow, setting that balance.
Excellent. So your one word is differentiation. Okay. Let's focus on one word. I want a short and succinct.
Yeah, product differentiation. Yes.
Yeah, product differentiation. Go for it.
Differentiation, absolutely.
Yeah. Sure. Subra, you can go next.
Well, my one word, and I'll explain it. My one word is market subsegments. Because, and I'll explain that. I recently went to buy, to see if I can buy an electric car, because it's very fascinating to buy an electric car for my wife. And the car drove very well, right? What the salesperson was advertising is the fact that it can drive 300 kilometers, 350 kilometers, etc., probably in test conditions on a single charge, right? What we wanted, we told them we are not buying this for range. We are buying this because it has lesser maintenance. It doesn't have oil change. It doesn't have other things. We are buying it for the convenience. And my wife is only going to drive this within the city, very short distances, probably drop the kids to school, go to a shop or something like that. So we were asking that person, give us a battery that is 1/4 the size or smaller. And that person did not have a configuration like that. So that is what I'm calling market subsegment. So within a segment, within a normal passenger car segment, there are these new subsegments now evolving in the market. So the market is changing. Right before, with petrol engines, diesel engines, this subsegment was not there, because that my wife would simply fill less petrol if they wanted to use less, far less. But all these new subsegments, and if you extend it to heavy vehicles, it's actually a lot more. We used to define heavy vehicles by the tonnage, 12 ton, 18 ton, 35 ton. But if you take 12 ton today, just as an example, we have to go to the customer and ask that customer, what is your usage of this 12 ton vehicle? Are you using it 24 hours a day? In which case, maybe swapping makes sense. Are you using it? One customer told us he carries LPG cylinders and he's going to be waiting in a queue most of the day to refill the cylinder. So that's, to me, a charging opportunity, that queue waiting time, right? And then you have a much smaller battery pack that you slow charge or fast charge or whatever you want to do, depending on how long you're waiting in the queue. So we have to now start asking these questions and identify the segment within the segment, within the market segment.
Yeah.
And that is going to tell us whether EV is viable for them. Right? So to me, that one word is subsegment.
Excellent. Subra. Ramesh, you can go next. Yeah.
I would have gone with customer segmentation, but Subra stole the thunder. Okay, so I'm going to try something else. I would say continuous research. We have to treat this as the beginning of the journey, but should not treat it as, okay, we are already there, right? So this is just the beginning of the journey, and there should be continuous focus on fundamental research on EV as a technology and other options also. So I would go for continuous research.
Excellent. Subbu, sorry.
I will put it in 2 words. I will take the liberty of being the last to say that safety and reliability. I mean, when you're looking at differentiation, market research, whatever you do, at the end of the day, the vehicle has to be safe for the person to use, and it has to be reliable. I mean, we have had incidents of fire in the country in the past year or two, and we've also seen where use cases where because of different dynamics of the electric vehicle, the wear and tear of the tires, the suspension, the forks, these are challenged.
Absolutely.
So I strongly feel that if it really has to take whatever research, whatever you do, at the end of the day, it has to boil down to safety and reliability.
Absolutely. I think the business model should have enough information on what is the maintenance and service infrastructure required, capture that in it, and what is the training required, not just for the operator, but for the the service technicians, etc. And plan that ahead. And that's great. And thank you all for your time, Subbu, Subra, Ramesh, and Shankar, and thanks Hiran in the background for doing all the background work. And here we come to a close for episode 9 on opportunities and challenges for the EV scale up.
Thank
you all.
Great one. Thank you.